Peter Brookes joins us, Heritage Foundation Senior Research Fellow, to talk a little bit more about this. Let's start where Griff ended on the formation of this new government in Afghanistan. A lot of people would argue it very much does matter how that looks and who's in charge of it. In fact, there are reports from Reuters that the co-founder of the Taliban and someone who's been nicknamed the Butcher over the years, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, may be the person who heads this new government. What would you say about how things might be shaping up as the Taliban takes over in Afghanistan?
Not well. You know, the thing, Connell, about this is that it didn't have to come to this. I mean, this is the result of flawed policies. And we shouldn't be even talking about the Taliban, controlling Afghanistan and trying to lead a government, especially one that is the co-founder of the Taliban. I mean, that's very, very troubling. And I think there's dark days ahead, unfortunately. I wish I could look at it differently, but I think there are dark days ahead for this policy and for Afghanistan.
And especially with American citizens still in country, this idea that the United States still needs to work with the new government in Afghanistan in some capacity. Secretary Blinken did talk about that today. I want to listen a little bit more to what he had to say, and then we'll get your reaction. Here's the Secretary earlier today.
There is an expectation that any government that emerges now will have some real inclusivity, and that it will have non-Talibs in it who are representative of different communities and different interests in Afghanistan.
A new government in Afghanistan with real inclusivity. Is that a realistic expectation, Peter?
I don't think so. I think the Taliban are recalling the shots. Even if they bring in some folks that may make them look inclusive to the international community, I think the Taliban is going to be deciding the policies of that government. And we know exactly what we're dealing with when we're dealing with the Taliban. We know their associations. They're fighting alongside Al-Qaeda today against some resistance groups in parts of Afghanistan. They had a long relationship with terrorist groups like the Haqqani Network and Al-Qaeda. So, I mean, I don't know that you can bring people into the government, but really my sense is that the Taliban is going to have a huge stamp on the policies of Afghanistan going forward.
There are also the questions about getting American citizens who are still there, which Griff mentioned, out. Now, the Secretary Blinken's been maintaining that many of the American citizens that are still there are American citizens, certainly, but they're dual nationals. And he was saying in his remarks that, Afghanistan to many of these people is their home country. And I think he said something like it's a wrenching decision for them to decide whether or not to get out. Does that make sense to you? Do you think that's what's really happening in terms of the people that are still left? I mean, that it's almost their decision to stay? Or do you still put it back on the American government not doing enough to get them out?
It's a flawed policy in the first place, so it's very difficult. And I hope Congress is going to get involved, because I'm having a very hard time, as I imagine others are, keeping track of the numbers and the vetting situation. There's been reports that some people, we don't know exactly who we took out of the country. So Congress, with somebody who does oversight over the federal government, needs to get involved, needs to hold hearings, needs to advise the American people and inform the American people of the ground truth. It's very difficult for the press, very difficult for us on the outside to do that.
Well, speaking of the process, that as a final point, the one thing that stood out to me that Secretary Blinken said today about the special immigrant visas, the SIV application process, was that, they say, well, we inherited a backlog and there were a lot of problems with it to begin with. And then we discovered, he said, that this process was not meant to be done during an emergency evacuation. And as he was saying that, I was thinking, well, then why was it done during an emergency evacuation? Right. In other words, why wasn't it done beforehand, get the people out? Right. And then, I know that question's been asked a number of times, but I thought it came up again today with those comments. Final thoughts from you, and then we'll move on, Peter.
Well, look, we've got a lot of challenges. And once again, like I said, it didn't have to be this way. Congress, maybe a commission, needs to look into this. This has, affected our credibility overseas. It's amazing to me. One last point, Connell, is that how the Americans on the ground, the soldiers, the State Department and others were able to execute so well in following on a failed policy. It's just amazing, and a tremendous amount of tribute needs to go to them, considering the marching orders that they were given by the Biden administration.
On that note, we'll wrap it up. It's good to see you as always. Peter Brookes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.